The text message arrived at 9:17 p.m. 3 words. I'm still okay. Anyone else would have glanced at it and moved on, but I nearly dropped my coffee. Because 30 years earlier, sitting at a cheap diner outside Fort Bragg, I had taught my little sister exactly what those words meant. If she was safe, she would write, I'm doing okay. If she was being watched, controlled, or forced to pretend everything was fine, she would write, I'm still okay. One word. That was the difference. One word meant trouble. One word meant she needed help. One word meant I had 15 minutes to decide whether I was overreacting or whether my sister was in danger. 15 minutes later, I was already driving toward her house. And for the first time in 20 years, I was using skills I thought I'd left behind when I retired from the military. My brother-in-law had always thought I was just his quiet, gentle sister-in-law. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I retired from the army at 56. 20 years in uniform had taught me many things, but perhaps the most important lesson was knowing when not to talk about myself. A surprising number of people spend their lives trying to impress strangers. I never saw the point. After retirement, I moved into a small house outside Richmond, Virginia. It wasn't fancy. The front porch needed repainting. The flower beds constantly fought against the weeds. The mailbox leaned slightly to the left no matter how many times I fixed it. I loved every inch of it. Most mornings I woke before sunrise, made coffee, and sat on the porch listening to birds wake up. Nobody there knew much about my past. To them, I was simply Sarah Mitchell, a quiet woman who liked gardening, a widow who volunteered at the animal shelter, a woman who baked peach cobbler for church fundraisers. I preferred it that way. The army had already taken enough years of my life. I didn't need to carry it into every conversation. My younger sister Emily lived about 40 minutes away. She was 4 years younger than me, and had always been the softer one between us. When we were children, I climbed trees. Emily picked flowers. I got into fights. Emily apologized for them. I joined the military. Emily became a school librarian. Yet somehow we had always remained close, especially after our parents passed away. For years, every Sunday became our tradition. Lunch together. Coffee afterward. A few hours talking about nothing important. Those afternoons meant more to me than I ever admitted. Emily married Kevin Brooks 8 years earlier. At first I liked him. Most people did. Kevin was charming when he wanted to be. He shook hands firmly, remembered birthdays, told funny stories at barbecues, helped neighbors move furniture. The kind of man people described as a good guy. But charm can hide many things. The first time I noticed something strange was about 3 years into their marriage. Emily stopped making decisions. Not openly. Not dramatically. Just little things. I'd ask where she wanted to eat. She'd look at Kevin first. I'd ask if she wanted to visit me for a weekend. She'd check with Kevin. I'd ask what movie she wanted to see. Kevin answered for her. At first I convinced myself I was imagining it. Then the pattern continued. Year after year. Little pieces of my sister seemed to disappear. One Sunday afternoon while Emily was in the kitchen, Kevin sat across from me on their patio. He took a sip of beer and laughed. You know, Sarah, I don't think you've ever had a real job. I smiled. Really? Sure. He gestured toward the flower beds. You've always seemed pretty relaxed. I nearly laughed. I'd spent years sleeping in tents, surviving desert heat, managing soldiers, and making life or death decisions. But I simply said, that's one way to look at it. Kevin chuckled. I mean, Emily's the strong one. She's always been the responsible one. I watched him carefully. Not because his words offended me. Because of the way he said them. There was something beneath the joke. Something dismissive. Something that suggested he enjoyed underestimating people. Especially women. After that, similar comments became common. Sarah's too nice for the real world. Sarah doesn't understand business. Sarah worries too much. Sarah spends all day with flowers and dogs. Emily usually looked uncomfortable when he spoke that way, but she never challenged him. That bothered me more than Kevin's comments ever could. The sister I grew up with wasn't afraid of speaking her mind. The woman sitting beside him seemed afraid of something. I just couldn't figure out what. Over the next 2 years, the changes became harder to ignore. Emily stopped answering calls immediately. She rarely went anywhere alone. Her social circle shrank. Friends stopped visiting. Family gatherings became less frequent. When I asked if everything was okay, she always smiled. Always. The exact same smile. The smile people wear when they don't want to discuss the truth. One afternoon while helping her clean the garage, I noticed bruising near her wrist. My stomach tightened. What happened? She immediately pulled down her sleeve. Nothing. Emily. I bumped into a shelf. The answer came too quickly. Too rehearsed. I didn't push further. Not then. Pressure often makes frightened people retreat. Years of leadership had taught me that. Instead, I stayed patient, observed, waited. Months passed. Then one evening nearly 30 years after we first created it, our old emergency code returned. Back when I was a young Army officer, Emily worried about me constantly. She worried during deployments. She worried during training exercises. She worried whenever she couldn't reach me. So I created a simple communication system. If one of us ever needed help but couldn't ask directly, we'd use specific phrases. It was meant as a joke, a sisterly game, something we'd probably never need, or so we thought. For decades, neither of us used it. Until that night. At 9:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "I'm still okay." Nothing else. No emoji. No explanation. No follow-up. Just 3 words. I stared at the screen. Every instinct inside me woke up. People often imagine military training as weapons tactics or combat. They're wrong. The most valuable skill I learned was recognizing patterns. And when patterns suddenly change, pay attention. Emily hadn't accidentally sent that message. She had chosen every word. Carefully. Deliberately. For a long moment I sat in silence. The coffee in my hand grew cold. Outside, the evening air had become still. Then I opened my contacts. Not to call Emily. Not yet. Because if she was being watched, calling could make things worse. Instead, I began gathering information. The way I'd been trained to do for 20 years. Slowly. Methodically. Without panic. Without assumptions. Within minutes, I already knew one thing for certain. Something was very wrong. And for the first time in years, I had the unmistakable feeling that my sister was asking me to come find her. Part 2, the distress code. The first rule of crisis response is simple. Don't let fear make decisions for you. The second rule is even more important. Gather facts before taking action. I repeated both rules silently as I set my coffee aside and moved into my home office. Most people would probably assume that after retirement, military habits disappear. They don't. Not the useful ones. The discipline stays with you. The ability to remain calm stays with you. The instinct to evaluate situations objectively stays with you. Within 60 seconds, I had a legal pad on my desk, a pen, my laptop open, and a timeline already forming in my head. 9:17 p.m. Message received. "I'm still okay." The phrase itself wasn't enough to tell me exactly what was happening, but it told me something crucial. Emily believed she couldn't speak freely. That narrowed the possibilities considerably. I wrote down every interaction we'd had over the previous month. Every phone call. Every visit. Every unusual detail. The process felt familiar, not because I was conducting some dramatic investigation, because I was looking for patterns. Patterns reveal truths that emotions often miss. The first thing that stood out was how little I had actually spoken to Emily recently. 3 years earlier, we talked almost daily. Now sometimes 4 or 5 days passed between conversations. At the time, I'd blamed life, schedules, age, responsibilities. Now I wasn't so sure. I scrolled through our text history. An uncomfortable realization settled in my stomach. Nearly every conversation ended abruptly. Nearly every phone call lasted less than 10 minutes, and almost every weekend visit had been canceled by Kevin. Not Emily. Kevin. I underlined his name several times. Then I picked up my phone. My first call wasn't to the police. It wasn't to Emily. It wasn't even to Kevin. It was to a woman named Diane. Diane lived 2 houses down from Emily. A retired nurse. Friendly. Observant. The kind of neighbor who noticed everything. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Sarah, everything okay?" "I'm not sure." There was a brief pause. "What happened?" I chose my words carefully. "When was the last time you saw Emily?" Another pause. Longer this time. "That's a strange question. When was it?" Diane sighed. "A few days ago." "How did she seem?" Silence. Then another sigh. And suddenly I knew. Because people only hesitate like that when they're deciding whether to tell the truth. "Not good," Diane finally said. My grip tightened around the phone. "What do you mean?" "I don't know exactly." "Tell me anyway." Diane lowered her voice. "I've heard them fighting." I stared out the window. The night suddenly felt colder. "How often?" "More lately." "Physical?" "I don't know." That answer sounded honest. She wasn't exaggerating. She wasn't guessing. She simply didn't know. "What kind of fighting?" "Kevin yelling." My jaw tightened. "Emily?" Mostly crying. I closed my eyes for a moment. Years ago during deployment briefings, we'd often discuss indicators. One indicator alone meant little. Several indicators together created a pattern, and I was beginning to see one. "Anything else?" I asked. "Actually," Diane hesitated again. "What?" "I haven't seen Emily driving lately." That caught my attention. Emily loved driving. Always had. Road trips. Weekend bookstore runs. Coffee shop visits. Driving represented freedom to her. "How long?" "Maybe 2 months." 2 months? I wrote it down immediately. Anything else? Another pause. Kevin fired their housekeeper. When? About 3 weeks ago. That was odd. Emily had arthritis in both knees. The housekeeper helped because some tasks had become difficult. Why would Kevin suddenly eliminate that support? Unless isolation was the goal. My military career taught me something uncomfortable about control. People who seek control rarely start with dramatic acts. They start small. Remove support systems. Limit independence. Restrict communication. Gradually narrow someone's world. By the time outsiders notice, the damage is often significant. When I ended the call, I sat quietly for several moments. Not because I was shocked. Because I wasn't. Deep down, I'd been worried for years. Now evidence was simply catching up to instinct. I checked the time. 9:31 p.m. 14 minutes since the text arrived. I opened social media. Emily hadn't posted anything in weeks. That wasn't normal. She loved books, libraries, photos of her garden. There was always something. Now there was nothing. Next, I checked a neighborhood community page. Several recent posts mentioned Kevin. Not directly. Indirectly. One neighbor complained about loud arguments. Another mentioned police being called somewhere on the street several weeks earlier. No names listed. Still, more pieces. More patterns. More reasons to worry. Then something else occurred to me. I opened a folder containing family documents. Birthdays. Addresses. Emergency contacts. Years earlier, Emily had given me access to several things in case of emergencies. Most people never think about emergency planning until they need it. Military families think differently. Preparation becomes second nature. One file contained contact information for Emily's physician. Another listed medications. Everything appeared normal. Then I noticed something missing. A recent update wasn't there. Emily usually updated everything meticulously. The absence bothered me. Small details matter, especially when someone who is habitually organized suddenly stops being organized. At 9:34 p.m. I made a decision. I would drive to her house. Not tomorrow. Not in the morning. Now. Before leaving, I sent one carefully worded text. Not to Emily. To Kevin. Just enough to establish a baseline. Just enough to see how he responded. Thinking about stopping by tomorrow. Hope you both are doing well. The reply came less than a minute later. Too fast. Almost as if he'd been staring at his phone. We're fine. No mention of Emily. No greeting. No warmth. Just 2 words. We're fine. Not she's fine. Not Emily says hello. We're fine. Control often reveals itself in language. I had seen that pattern before. Many times. I grabbed my keys, my purse, a lightweight jacket. Then I paused beside the front door. The house was silent. The grandfather clock in my hallway ticked steadily. For a moment I felt the weight of age. Not physical age. Emotional age. The realization that after all these years I might be stepping into another crisis. I had spent decades protecting soldiers, guiding young men and women through dangerous situations, helping families through difficult phone calls. I thought that chapter of my life had ended. Apparently not. As I locked the door behind me, the night air felt cool against my face. The drive normally took 40 minutes. I covered it in 32. Not because I sped recklessly. Because my mind had already shifted into operational mode. Observe, assess, respond. The familiar rhythm returned effortlessly. By the time I reached Emily's neighborhood, most houses were dark. Porch lights glowed softly. Sprinklers clicked somewhere in the distance. Everything appeared peaceful. Too peaceful. I parked half a block away. Old habits. I wanted to observe before announcing my presence. Walking slowly along the sidewalk, I studied the house. Lights were on downstairs. One upstairs. The garage was closed. No obvious signs of disturbance. No police. No ambulance. No visible emergency. To anyone else it looked perfectly normal. Then I reached the side yard. And froze. Through a narrow gap between curtains I could see part of the living room. Emily was sitting on the couch. Her shoulders were trembling. She was crying. And standing near the doorway was Kevin. Watching her. Not comforting her. Not speaking. Just watching. Then he walked to the front door. Checked the lock. And locked it again. My heartbeat slowed. Not faster. Slower. The way it always did when a situation became clear. Because uncertainty had just become certainty. Emily hadn't imagined the danger. And neither had I. Something was very wrong inside that house. And for the first time that night I stopped wondering whether my sister needed help. Now I needed to figure out exactly how to get her out. Part 3. The man who didn't know who he was dealing with. For nearly a minute I remained in the shadows beside the hedge watching the living room window. Emily sat motionless on the couch. Kevin paced. Back and forth. Back and forth. Every movement carried the same restless energy I'd seen many times before. Not in family homes, in command briefings, in disciplinary hearings, in rooms where people knew they were losing control and were desperately trying to regain it. The difference was that soldiers eventually accepted accountability. People like Kevin usually didn't. I watched him stop beside Emily. He said something. I couldn't hear the words through the glass, but I saw her shoulders tighten. Then she nodded, a small defeated nod. Kevin walked away again. The sight made something twist inside my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Sadness. Because I remembered who Emily used to be. The woman sitting on that couch wasn't the sister who had once driven 6 hours through a snowstorm to help me move into my first apartment. She wasn't the woman who organized community literacy programs. She wasn't the woman who could make an entire room laugh with one perfectly timed joke. This Emily looked smaller, like someone who had spent years apologizing for simply existing. I had seen it happen before. Control changes people, not overnight, slowly. One concession at a time, one compromise at a time, one humiliation at a time, until they no longer recognize themselves. I stepped away from the window and walked toward the front porch. No more observation. It was time to make contact. The porch light illuminated the front steps as I climbed them. Then I rang the bell. Inside movement stopped immediately. 10 seconds passed, then 20. The door finally opened. Kevin stood there wearing jeans and a gray polo shirt. For a brief second, surprise flashed across his face. Then the familiar smile appeared, the one he used whenever he wanted to look charming. Sarah, I smiled politely. Evening. What are you doing here? I was in the area. That was obviously a lie. We both knew it. His smile tightened slightly. At 10 o'clock at night, I wanted to check on Emily. She's fine. There it was again. Not let me get her. Not come inside. Not ask her yourself. Just a statement. She's fine. I looked past him toward the living room. I'd still like to see her. Kevin shifted his weight. A tiny movement. Most people wouldn't notice. I did. Because hesitation often reveals more than words. She's tired. I'm sure she can decide that herself. The smile disappeared entirely. Only for a second. But it disappeared. Then Emily appeared in the hallway. When she saw me, something flickered across her face. Relief. Not excitement. Not surprise. Relief. That told me everything. Sarah. Her voice sounded strained. I immediately noticed several things. Red eyes. Swollen eyelids. A faint bruise near her wrist. And something even more troubling. She wouldn't look directly at Kevin. Not for more than a second. People don't avoid eye contact with someone they trust. Not repeatedly. Not instinctively. I was worried about you, I said. Emily opened her mouth. Then glanced toward Kevin. Then looked back at me. I'm okay. The words sounded rehearsed. The same way her smile looked rehearsed. The same way everything about this interaction felt rehearsed. Kevin stepped slightly forward. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to insert himself between us. You see, he said, everything's fine. I looked directly at him. I wasn't talking to you. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It felt much longer. Kevin blinked. Emily looked stunned. Apparently nobody had spoken to him that way in a while. Interesting. I turned back toward my sister. Can I come in? Another glance toward Kevin. Another hesitation. Then she nodded. Sure. Kevin clearly wanted to refuse. But doing so would look suspicious. Even he understood that. Reluctantly, he stepped aside. The moment I entered the house, my instincts became louder. Not because of anything dramatic. Because of small things. Very small things. The kind most people overlook. A security camera mounted in the corner of the living room. Another pointed toward the kitchen. One near the hallway. Too many cameras for a normal home. Especially indoors. The furniture arrangement had changed. Emily's reading chair was gone. Her bookshelves had been reduced by half. Family photographs were missing from several walls. Instead, framed motivational quotes hung in their place. Control. 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 Everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of it. We sat in the living room. Kevin chose the chair nearest Emily. Not beside her. Near her. Positioning himself like a guard. I spent the next 20 minutes making conversation. Nothing confrontational. Nothing dramatic. The weather. Church events. Neighborhood gossip. The entire time I watched. And listened. More importantly, I watched what Kevin did. Every question directed at Emily received the same response. She started answering. Kevin interrupted. She offered an opinion. Kevin corrected it. She told a story. Kevin finished it for her. Again. And again. And again. Eventually, I deliberately tested something. Emily, are you still volunteering at the library on Thursdays? Before she could answer, Kevin spoke. Not anymore. I kept my eyes on my sister. I asked Emily. The room became very quiet. Emily stared down at her hands. Kevin leaned back slowly. His jaw tightened. And suddenly I understood something important. He wasn't worried about me. He was annoyed by me. To Kevin, I wasn't a threat. I was simply an inconvenience. A nosy older sister. A retired woman with flowers in her yard. Someone he assumed he could dismiss. The arrogance was almost impressive. After another 10 minutes I stood. I should get going. Emily looked disappointed. That hurt more than I expected. Because it told me she didn't want me to leave. Kevin practically escorted me toward the door. Not rudely. Just eagerly. As we reached the porch I turned toward Emily. Could you help me carry something to my car? Kevin answered instantly. What? I smiled. A box of books. There are no books, I shrugged. Then help me carry the imaginary books. For the first time all evening, Emily almost smiled. Almost. And because refusing would seem ridiculous, Kevin reluctantly allowed it. The moment we stepped outside alone, I spoke quietly. How bad is it? Emily's face collapsed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough for me to see the truth. Tears filled her eyes immediately. Oh God, that was all she said. 2 words. But they carried years of exhaustion. I took her hand gently. He hurts you. She shook her head, then hesitated, then nodded. Not physically often, but enough. Enough. The answer landed like a stone inside my chest. How long? Her voice cracked. 2 years. 2 years. My sister had been living in fear for 2 years. And I hadn't known. The guilt hit hard. Harder than anger. Harder than outrage. Because every older sibling believes they'll protect the younger one, no matter how old they become. And somehow I had missed this. He controls everything, she whispered. My phone. My money. My schedule. My stomach tightened. What do you need from me? She looked directly into my eyes. For the first time that night. For the first time in years, perhaps. And I saw the old Emily. The brave Emily. The sister I remembered? I need a way out. I squeezed her hand. You have one. A car door slammed somewhere down the street. We both looked up. Time was running out. I leaned closer. Listen carefully. She nodded. Tomorrow. Documents. Financial records. Bank statements. Medical records. Anything important. Make copies. Hide them. Then call me. Can you do that? Emily inhaled shakily. Yes. Good. The answer sounded stronger than anything she'd said all evening. Before returning to the house, she stopped me. Sarah, what? Her eyes searched mine. Why aren't you scared of him? I almost laughed. Not because the question was funny. Because the answer was simple. For 20 years I had dealt with crises, emergencies, and people who thought intimidation made them powerful. Kevin wasn't special. He was just another bully, one who had finally chosen the wrong target. I smiled gently. Because I've handled people much worse than Kevin. Then I walked away. Behind me the front door opened. And I knew something Kevin didn't. The moment Emily asked for help, he had already lost. Part 4. The perfect ambush. The biggest mistake people make when dealing with a controlling person is believing the confrontation itself is the victory. It isn't. The confrontation is simply the moment the truth becomes visible. The real victory happens beforehand, quietly, patiently, piece by piece. Over the next 3 weeks I spoke to Emily almost every day. Not through normal phone calls. Not at first. Kevin monitored those. Instead, we used methods that would have seemed ridiculous to anyone else. Emails hidden inside book recommendations. Messages tucked into online library requests. Short notes passed through trusted friends. Nothing illegal. Nothing dramatic. Just enough communication to stay connected while keeping Kevin unaware. The entire time I followed the same principle that had guided me throughout my military career. Never move faster than your intelligence. Gather information first. Act second. The evidence accumulated quickly. Far more quickly than I expected. By the end of the first week I understood something disturbing. Kevin wasn't simply controlling. He was desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. Lots of them. Emily began copying documents whenever she could. Bank statements, credit card records, insurance paperwork, property documents, everything. One afternoon she called from a grocery store parking lot. Her voice trembled. Sarah, what happened? I found another account. I sat up immediately. What kind of account? A savings account, in both names. No. The silence that followed was enough. Kevin had hidden it. For years. The balance contained nearly $160,000. Money Emily knew nothing about. Money accumulated while Kevin repeatedly claimed they couldn't afford vacations. Couldn't afford repairs. Couldn't afford retirement planning. Couldn't afford basic things Emily wanted. The discovery changed everything. Because financial abuse leaves a paper trail. And paper trails don't lie. A few days later, another piece surfaced. Then another. Then another. By the second week, we had documentation showing Kevin had quietly transferred funds between accounts for years. Not illegally. Not quite. But deceptively. Very deceptively. Every new document strengthened Emily. I could hear it in her voice. The woman who had once whispered now spoke more confidently. The woman who constantly apologized now asked questions. Important questions, strategic questions, questions about lawyers, questions about housing, questions about rebuilding her life. The old Emily was slowly returning. And Kevin had no idea. One evening she called me while sitting inside her car. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Were you ever afraid in the army?" I smiled. "What kind of question is that?" "A serious one." I considered it carefully, then answered honestly. "Every good leader gets scared." "Really?" "Of course." "What makes them different?" I looked out my kitchen window. The sun was setting beyond the trees. Orange light painted the yard. "They move forward anyway." For several seconds she said nothing. Then I heard her exhale. A long breath. The kind people release when they're finally beginning to believe in themselves again. "Okay." "Okay, what?" "I'm ready." That was the moment I knew. Not that we'd won, but that Emily was no longer trapped mentally. The emotional prison was cracking, and once that happens, the rest becomes possible. The following Monday, I drove her to meet an attorney, a woman named Rebecca Turner, mid-60s, sharp, experienced, absolutely fearless. After reviewing the documents, Rebecca removed her glasses and leaned back. "How much does your husband know?" Emily shook her head. "Nothing." Rebecca smiled. Good. I had seen that smile before. It was the smile professionals wear when they realize the facts are stronger than they expected. For nearly 2 hours, Rebecca reviewed evidence, financial records, medical reports, photographs, emails, witness statements, everything. When the meeting ended, she looked directly at Emily. "You have options." Emily's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness. Relief. Pure relief. Because for years Kevin had convinced her she had none. That was how he maintained control. Not through strength. Through hopelessness. Once hope returns, control begins to crumble. The final piece arrived unexpectedly. And ironically, Kevin provided it himself. 3 days later, Emily discovered evidence of an affair. At first, she didn't want to investigate. She almost ignored it. Then she remembered something I'd told young officers years earlier. Truth doesn't become less true because you avoid it. So she looked, and found everything. Messages, hotel receipts, photographs, months of deception. When she showed me the evidence, I wasn't shocked. Men like Kevin often believe rules apply only to other people. The discovery wasn't emotionally satisfying. It was strategically useful. Very useful, Rebecca agreed. By the beginning of the 4th week, everything was ready. The documents, the filings, the financial protections, the relocation plan. Every detail carefully arranged. Now we simply needed the right moment. Kevin gave us that too. His birthday party. A large gathering at a local country club. Friends, co-workers, neighbors. Dozens of guests. The perfect audience. I almost laughed when Emily told me. For years, Kevin had carefully managed appearances. He cared deeply about image, reputation, status. The party represented everything he valued, which made it the perfect location. The evening arrived warm and clear. The country club buzzed with conversation. Champagne glasses clinked. Music drifted through the ballroom. People laughed, smiled, celebrated. Kevin loved every second of it. I watched from across the room as he moved between groups, shaking hands, telling stories, playing the role of successful husband, successful professional, successful man. Nobody else knew the performance was ending. At one point he raised a glass. "Thank you all for coming." Applause followed. More smiles, more laughter. Then he wrapped an arm around Emily, a gesture that looked affectionate, until you noticed how tense she became. "I couldn't have done any of this without my wife." More applause. Then came the line that made my stomach turn. "She's not going anywhere." Several guests laughed. Emily didn't. Neither did I. Because he meant it. And he believed it. That was the problem. He genuinely believed she belonged to him. A few moments later, Rebecca entered the room. She wore a navy suit and carried a thin leather folder. Nothing dramatic. Nothing theatrical. Just business. I saw Kevin notice her. Confusion crossed his face. Then concern. Then uncertainty. Interesting. Perhaps some part of him already knew. Rebecca approached calmly. Emily stepped forward. The room gradually became quieter. People sensed something was happening. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. Kevin looked between them. "What is this?" Rebecca opened the folder. Emily accepted several documents. Then she handed them directly to her husband. The silence became absolute. Kevin stared down at the papers. His face lost color. Not all at once. Gradually, like someone watching a storm approach. No. One word, barely audible. No. Again, louder. Emily stood perfectly still. For the first time since I'd arrived, she looked completely calm, completely free. Kevin's eyes moved rapidly across the pages. Divorce petition, financial disclosures, legal notices, everything. The reality finally reached him. The control was gone. The secrets were exposed. The future he assumed belonged to him had disappeared. His gaze snapped toward me. Across the ballroom. Across dozens of stunned guests. Across years of arrogance. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. Several people looked shocked. I wasn't. I had been waiting for that question, not because I needed recognition, but because it revealed something important. After 8 years in the family, Kevin still didn't know me. Not really. He never bothered. He saw what he wanted to see. A quiet woman. A retired gardener. A harmless older sister. Nothing more. I met his stare calmly. Then smiled. "The person you should have been worried about from the beginning." The room remained silent, and for the first time all evening, Kevin looked afraid. Part 5, 20 years of service and the final lesson. Fear changes people. Sometimes it makes them run. Sometimes it makes them fight. And sometimes, when a person has spent years believing they control everything, fear makes them unravel right in front of everyone. That night at the country club, I watched Kevin begin to unravel. At first he tried anger. That was predictable. People like Kevin almost always start with anger because it feels powerful. He threw the documents onto a nearby table. "This is ridiculous." Nobody responded. He looked at Emily, then at Rebecca, then at me. His voice rose another level. "She's lying." Still nobody responded. The silence around him grew heavier, because the truth has a strange effect on a room. Once enough people recognize it, lies suddenly sound much louder than they used to. The guests weren't hearing a confident husband anymore. They were hearing a desperate man, and they knew the difference. Kevin took a step toward Emily. For a brief second I saw the old pattern return. The intimidation, the pressure, the expectation that she would shrink back, that she would apologize, that she would surrender. Instead, Emily simply stood there, calm, steady, looking directly into his eyes. The expression on Kevin's face was almost painful to watch. Not because I felt sorry for him, because he genuinely couldn't understand what was happening. For years he had trained Emily to doubt herself, to second-guess herself, to seek permission. And now suddenly she wasn't doing any of those things. That terrified him. Rebecca calmly gathered the documents from the table. "Mr. Brooks, you've officially been served." Kevin ignored her. His entire focus remained on Emily. "You can't do this," she answered softly. "I already did." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it may have been the strongest thing I'd ever heard my sister say. The room remained silent. Then Kevin turned toward me. His eyes narrowed. "This was you." I shrugged. "No." "What?" "This was Emily." He laughed bitterly. Emily could never pull something like this off. The moment the words left his mouth, I saw several guests exchange glances, because there it was. The entire problem. Not the money. Not the affair. Not even the control. It was the fact that Kevin genuinely believed Emily was incapable. That belief had poisoned their marriage from the beginning. Emily heard it too. I could see it in her face. And for the first time she looked almost sad for him. Not frightened. Not angry. Sad. Like someone finally seeing a broken person clearly. The party ended shortly afterward. People left quietly. Some offered support. Others avoided eye contact. A few clearly enjoyed the drama. Human nature never changes. As for Kevin, he stormed out before the evening ended. That would be the last time I saw him socially. The legal process took several months. Longer than Emily wanted. Shorter than Rebecca expected. The reason was simple. Facts. Facts are stubborn things. The financial records existed. The hidden accounts existed. The affair existed. The documentation existed. No amount of outrage could make them disappear. Throughout the proceedings, Kevin continued insisting he was the victim. That wasn't surprising either. Some people build their identities around never being wrong. Admitting fault feels impossible, so they rewrite reality instead. The court wasn't interested in rewritten reality. The court was interested in evidence, and evidence told a very different story. By the time everything concluded, Kevin lost far more than he expected. A substantial portion of his assets, his reputation, several professional opportunities, relationships with people who finally saw him clearly. Most importantly, he lost control, the one thing he valued most. Emily, meanwhile, gained something far more valuable. Freedom. The first time I visited her new apartment, she cried before we even unpacked the first box. Not because she was overwhelmed, because she could finally lock a door and know nobody would demand explanations. She could buy groceries without asking permission. She could call friends without being monitored. She could sit quietly and read a book for 3 hours if she wanted. Simple things. Things most people take for granted. Things she had slowly lost over the years. One afternoon, several months after the divorce was finalized, we sat together on her balcony drinking coffee. The spring air felt warm. Birds moved through the trees. For the first time in a very long while, Emily looked peaceful. Really peaceful. Not the practiced smile she'd worn for years. Real peace. The kind that settles deep in a person's shoulders. The kind that changes how they breathe. She stirred her coffee slowly, then looked at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." She smiled. "When did you know?" I already knew what she meant. "When did I know something was wrong?" She nodded. I thought about it for a moment. "The truth?" "Please." "I suspected years ago." Her expression fell. "I should have said something." "No." "You should have." I shook my head. "Emily, people leave situations when they're ready." She looked down. "I wasted so much time." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "No?" "What do you mean?" "You survived." Tears appeared instantly. Because survivors often blame themselves for the years they spent enduring something. They forget how hard survival actually is. They forget how much courage it takes simply to keep going. "I wasn't very brave," she whispered. I smiled. "That's where you're wrong." She looked confused. So I told her something I had learned during 20 years in uniform. People think courage means running toward danger. Sometimes it does. But more often, courage means telling the truth after years of silence. Courage means asking for help. Courage means believing you deserve better. Those things are often harder. Emily wiped her eyes, then laughed softly. "You always know what to say." "No," I smiled. "I've just had more practice." A year later, life looked very different. Emily accepted a leadership position at a literacy nonprofit. She rebuilt friendships, started traveling again, started laughing again. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the woman she used to be. Other times I'd see someone entirely new, someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side. As for Kevin, I heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. Nothing dramatic, nothing particularly satisfying, just ordinary consequences, and honestly that felt appropriate. Real life rarely delivers cinematic revenge. It delivers accountability. Slow, steady, unavoidable. One Sunday afternoon, almost exactly a year after that text message arrived, Emily and I sat on my porch watching the sunset. The same porch where I had received her distress code. The same porch where everything had changed. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question I had secretly expected. What if I never sent the message? I looked toward the horizon. Orange light spread across the sky. The answer came easily. Because it was true. I would have found you eventually. She laughed through tears, then leaned her head against my shoulder. For a while we simply sat there. Two sisters. Older now. Wiser now. Grateful now. And I realized something. People often assume the most important thing I learned during 20 years in the military was leadership. Or discipline. Or resilience. Those mattered. But the greatest lesson was simpler. Never ignore a quiet cry for help. Because sometimes 3 ordinary words can save someone's life. And sometimes the most important mission you'll ever undertake has nothing to do with serving your country. Sometimes it's bringing your family home. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever known someone who hid their pain behind a smile? Or have you ever found the courage to ask for help when you needed it most? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. We share stories like this every day. Stories about strength, dignity, family, and second chances. And if you'd like to continue this journey with us, please subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people you love. Have you ever had someone look you straight in the eye and reject not only you but your child, before that child even had a chance to be born? My father did. "I don't have this grandchild," he shouted, not in anger that faded after a few minutes, not in the heat of an argument. He said it with the cold certainty of a man making a decision he believed he would never regret. Then he pointed at the front door and told me to leave. That night I slept in my SUV in a grocery store parking lot outside Savannah, Georgia, 7 months after returning home from active military service. 48 hours later, a lawyer called. He told me my grandfather had left me $35 million. Every cent. But there was one condition. And what I discovered afterward forced me to confront a truth that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Emily Carter. This is the story of how my father lost his daughter long before he lost the fortune he thought belonged to him. My father used to tell people he was proud of me. Looking back, I think he was proud of the idea of me. Proud when strangers thanked him for having a daughter in the army. Proud when neighbors saw me in uniform during holidays. Proud when people at church shook his hand and said, "Frank, you raised a remarkable young woman." But being proud of someone in public and loving them in private are not always the same thing. I learned that slowly. The first warning signs appeared years before the night he threw me out. My mother died when I was 23. Cancer. Aggressive, fast. The kind that turns entire families into spectators. After she passed away, something changed inside my father. Some people become softer after loss. He became harder. Or maybe he had always been that way, and grief simply stripped away the parts he used to hide. My older brother Michael never seemed to notice. Michael was 40 years old and somehow perpetually in crisis. Every year there was something: a failed business, a truck payment he couldn't make, a girlfriend who left, a debt that suddenly needed covering. Some emergency always appeared. And somehow my father always found a way to rescue him. I was different. The Army teaches you many things, but one of the first is responsibility. If you make a mistake, you own it. If you fail, you fix it. Nobody is coming to save you. I built my life around that principle. I served overseas, completed officer training, made major before most people expected, bought my own vehicle, paid my own bills. When my father needed help replacing his roof 3 years earlier, I paid for half of it without hesitation. When Michael needed money after another failed venture, my father called me. Not to ask. To inform? Your brother needs help. The assumption was always that I would provide it. Sometimes I did. Sometimes I didn't. Each refusal created another crack in my relationship with my father. Then Ethan entered my life. Captain Ethan Brooks. Air Force. We met during a joint training exercise in Colorado. He was the kind of man who made quiet feel comfortable. Not because he talked constantly. Because he listened. We spent 2 years building something real. No drama. No games. No grand declarations. Just two people who understood service sacrifice and long periods apart. We planned to marry the following spring. Then his aircraft went down during a training accident. 3 men died that day. Ethan was one of them. There are moments in life when the world splits into before and after. That phone call was one of mine. I spent months functioning on habit. Wake up. Work. Exercise. Sleep. Repeat. The Army gave me structure. Structure carried me when emotion couldn't. Then one morning, almost 7 months after Ethan's death, I stared at a pregnancy test in my bathroom. Positive. I took another one. Positive. Then another. Positive. I sat on the floor for nearly an hour. Not because I was unhappy. Because I didn't know how to hold grief and joy at the same time. Yet somehow both were sitting beside me. Part of Ethan was still here. That realization made me cry harder than I had cried at his funeral. The first person I wanted to tell was my father, which now seems almost absurd. I waited 2 days, then drove to his house, the same house where I grew up. The same kitchen where my mother used to bake peach pies. The same dining room where my grandfather had sat every Thanksgiving for 30 years. My father was drinking coffee when I arrived. Michael was there too. Of course he was. He always seemed to be there lately. I sat down. My hands trembled slightly. "What's going on?" my father asked. I smiled. "I'm pregnant." For 1 second, nobody spoke. Then Michael looked surprised. My father looked confused. Then his expression changed. Not shock. Not concern. Something colder. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. I remember every detail because trauma preserves moments with perfect clarity. "Who's the father?" he asked. "Ethan." Silence. I swallowed. He froze embryos before deployment. We were planning for a future. His coffee cup touched the table. Slowly. Deliberately. Then he stood. "I don't have this grandchild." At first I thought I misunderstood. "What?" I said, "I don't have this grandchild." The room felt smaller. "Dad." "No." His voice rose. "You bring a baby into this situation after that boy is gone. That boy had a name." His eyes flashed. "I don't care." The words hit harder than I expected. Michael stared at the table, not defending me, not supporting me, just watching, the way people watch storms through windows. "You are throwing your life away," my father said. "I'm 32. You are destroying your military career." "No." You don't know what you're doing. I stood. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I came here because I thought you'd be happy. Happy, he laughed. One sharp, ugly laugh. Happy that my daughter is having a child with a dead man? The room went silent. I think part of me broke right then. Not dramatically. Not visibly. Just quietly. Like a rope finally snapping after years under tension. My father pointed toward the front door. Leave. I stared at him. You're serious. I've never been more serious. Dad, leave. Then came the final blow. If you go through with this, don't come back. I waited. Some part of me still expected him to stop. To apologize. To realize what he was saying. He didn't. Michael looked away. My father folded his arms. And I walked out. I slept in my SUV that night. A grocery store parking lot outside Savannah. The air smelled faintly of rain and asphalt. People pushed shopping carts beneath bright lights, while I sat alone behind tinted windows trying to understand how my life had changed so completely in less than an hour. Around midnight I called Ethan's old voicemail just to hear his voice. I listened, then listened again, then cried until there were no tears left. The next morning I began making plans. Temporary housing, medical appointments, financial calculations, the practical things. The things soldiers do when emotions become unmanageable. By the second afternoon, I was sitting in my vehicle outside a diner when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I answered, Emily Carter. Yes. My name is Gordon Reeves. The voice sounded professional. Measured. Careful. I'm calling regarding the estate of General Robert Carter. My grandfather. I sat up straighter. What about him? There was a pause. Then the lawyer said something that instantly changed the direction of my life. Miss Carter, your grandfather left you his entire $35 million estate. My heart stopped. Then came another pause, and 7 words that would change everything. But there is one condition attached. I spent the next 30 seconds staring through my windshield without actually seeing anything. Cars moved through the diner parking lot. A delivery truck backed toward a loading dock. Someone walked past carrying 2 paper bags. Normal life continued. Meanwhile, $35 million had just entered the conversation. And somehow that wasn't even the part that unsettled me most. The part that unsettled me was this. My grandfather had left everything to me. Not my father. Not my brother. Me. Miss Carter, Gordon Reeves asked. I realized I hadn't spoken. I'm here. Would you like me to explain? Yes. His voice remained calm. Professional. The voice of a man who spent his life delivering information that changed other people's futures. Your grandfather updated his estate plan approximately 8 months before his death. 8 months. I immediately did the math. That was long before my pregnancy. Long before my father disowned me. Long before any of the chaos that had consumed the past week. He named you sole beneficiary. I swallowed. What about my father? Another brief pause. He is not listed as a primary beneficiary. The words landed heavily. Not because I felt victorious. Because they didn't make sense. My grandfather loved my father, or at least I had always believed he did. Their relationship had been complicated at times, but never hostile. Certainly not hostile enough to explain $35 million. There must be some mistake. There isn't. He sounded certain. The documents have been reviewed multiple times. I rubbed my forehead. The pregnancy exhaustion had begun appearing more frequently over the previous week. My body felt heavier. My emotions sat closer to the surface. Nothing about this conversation felt real. Then Gordon said something even stranger. There's a condition attached to your inheritance. I sat up straighter. What kind of condition? You must reside at your grandfather's property in Asheville, North Carolina for 60 consecutive days. I blinked. That's it. Not exactly. Of course not. There are several requirements. I listened carefully. My grandfather's mountain property remained untouched since his death. The estate could not be transferred until I completed a process he had personally outlined. For 60 days I had to live in the house, review a collection of journals and documents he had left behind, complete a series of written acknowledgments prepared by his attorneys, and read every letter he had written before his death. Every single one. If I abandoned the process, the inheritance would automatically transfer to a veterans' charitable foundation. I sat quietly. The condition wasn't difficult. Odd, but not difficult. Why would he do that? Gordon exhaled slowly. General Carter was very specific about one thing. What? He said you would understand eventually. I stared through the windshield again. The diner sign buzzed softly outside. Understand what? Before I could ask, Gordon continued, there is transportation available whenever you're ready. When do I need to decide? You have 60 days from formal notification. I looked at the calendar on my phone. The clock had already started. 3 days later, I drove north. The journey from Georgia to North Carolina gave me too much time to think. The mountains appeared gradually. Rolling hills became ridges. Ridges became peaks. Clouds hung low over forests that seemed endless. By sunset, I turned onto a narrow private road. The property appeared through the trees. And for the first time in years, I felt my grandfather's absence with fresh force. The house sat exactly as I remembered it. Large but not extravagant. Stone chimney. Dark wood exterior. Wide porch facing the mountains. General Robert Carter had spent 30 years building that place after retiring from the army. Every summer of my childhood seemed connected to those mountains. Fishing trips, bonfires, long conversations, lessons disguised as stories. My grandfather had never lectured. He taught through examples. The front door opened before I reached it. A woman stepped outside. Mid-60s, silver hair, kind eyes. I recognized her immediately. Margaret Hayes, my grandfather's longtime housekeeper. Emily, her voice cracked slightly. She pulled me into a hug. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at my face. Oh, sweetheart. The sympathy in her voice nearly broke me. Somehow strangers had shown me more compassion in 1 week than my father had. Margaret helped me bring my bags inside. The house smelled exactly the same. Wood polish, coffee, old books, mountain air. The scent hit me like a memory. For several minutes I simply stood there, looking, listening, remembering. He missed you, Margaret said quietly. I nodded. I missed him too. Dinner that night was simple. Soup, bread, tea. Afterward, Margaret handed me a brass key. Your grandfather left instructions. I turned the key over in my hand. What does it open? The study. I smiled sadly. Of course it did. The study had always been sacred territory. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, military photographs, maps, awards, letters. My grandfather spent thousands of hours in that room. I walked there after Margaret went home. The key turned smoothly. The door opened. The room looked frozen in time. His reading glasses sat on the desk. A half-finished notebook remained beside them. The lamp still faced the leather chair he used every evening. For a second I could almost imagine he had stepped outside and would return any minute. Instead there was silence. On the desk sat a large wooden box. My name was written across the top. Emily. Nothing else. I sat down slowly, then opened it. Inside were dozens of envelopes, carefully organized, dated, labeled. Some looked years old. Others appeared recent. Beneath them sat several journals, financial records, legal folders, photographs, and a single handwritten note. I recognized his handwriting instantly. Strong, precise, military. The note contained only one sentence. Start at the beginning. So I did. The first letter was harmless. Childhood memories, stories about my grandmother, advice about leadership. The second letter was similar. Then the third. And the fourth? Hours passed. Outside darkness covered the mountains. Inside, the only light came from the desk lamp. Around midnight, I reached a newer group of letters. The tone changed. Subtly at first. Then dramatically. The entries became more serious. More personal. More urgent. I noticed something else. A name appeared repeatedly. Frank. My father. At first I assumed it was coincidence. Then it happened again. And again. And again. Entire pages centered around him. My grandfather's observations. Concerns. Disappointments. Questions. I felt unease settling into my stomach. The next envelope was dated only 6 months before his death. My fingers hesitated. Then I opened it. A folded letter slid onto the desk. I unfolded it carefully. The first sentence stopped me cold. Not because it was shocking. Because it felt impossible. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time. The words remained unchanged. Written in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. If you're reading this, your father has already betrayed you. The room suddenly felt much colder, and for the first time since arriving in Asheville, I realized my grandfather hadn't left me $35 million simply to change my life. He had left me something else. The truth. And somehow he had known I would need it. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the inheritance. Not because of the pregnancy. Because of one sentence. If you're reading this, your father has already betrayed you. I must have read it 20 times, each time hoping I had misunderstood, each time reaching the same conclusion. My grandfather had written those words deliberately, not emotionally, not impulsively, deliberately. That was what frightened me. General Robert Carter was many things: disciplined, patient, methodical. He wasn't a man who made dramatic statements without evidence. If he wrote something like that, he had a reason. And somewhere inside the study surrounding me, that reason was waiting. The mountains outside remained dark. Wind brushed softly against the windows. The grandfather clock in the hallway marked each passing hour. I sat beneath the desk lamp and opened the next letter, then the next, and the next. By 3 a.m, a picture was beginning to emerge. Not complete, but recognizable. My father had been in financial trouble for years. Not because of his own lifestyle, because of Michael. Again. Always Michael. The letters described situations I vaguely remembered. Money disappearing from family accounts, loans that were never repaid, investments that somehow produced no returns, businesses that collapsed after receiving large amounts of cash. For years I had assumed these were ordinary family setbacks. My grandfather had seen something different, a pattern. The next morning I made coffee and continued reading. The study overlooked the eastern ridge. Sunlight filtered through the trees. Birds moved between branches. The world looked peaceful. The documents in front of me told a different story. One journal entry caught my attention immediately. It was dated nearly 4 years earlier. Frank withdrew another $60,000 today. Claims it is temporary. Claims Michael will repay it. Neither statement is true. I stared at the page. $60,000. The number felt enormous. Then I remembered something. 4 years earlier, Michael had launched another business. A landscaping company. He claimed investors were interested. He claimed contracts were coming. The company lasted 7 months, then vanished. I had never asked where the startup money came from. Apparently my grandfather knew. The further I read, the worse it became. $80,000 here, $30,000 there. Property refinanced, savings accounts drained. Promises made, promises broken, over and over. The tragedy wasn't simply the money, it was the trust. My grandfather kept giving my father opportunities to fix things, to tell the truth, to stop enabling Michael. Instead, both men continued digging deeper. Around noon, I found a sealed folder. Across the front were 3 handwritten words. For Emily only. I opened it carefully. Inside sat financial records, bank statements, property transfers, loan documents, everything organized with military precision. And suddenly the situation became much harder to dismiss. These weren't suspicions. These were facts, documented, verified, proven. My grandfather had spent years quietly tracking what was happening. A yellow sticky note rested on top. Emily, facts matter more than feelings. Always. Grandpa? I laughed softly despite myself. That sounded exactly like him. Then I started reading. 3 hours later, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Possibly more. Money had flowed steadily toward Michael for over a decade. My father had funded almost every disaster. When savings ran low, assets disappeared. When assets ran low, loans appeared. When loans became difficult, someone else paid the difference. Sometimes that someone was my grandfather. Sometimes it was me. And that realization hit harder than anything else. Because suddenly I remembered all the moments. The unexpected requests, the emergencies, the urgent calls. Your brother needs help. Not asks, expectations. I had contributed thousands over the years. Not because Michael deserved it. Because I trusted my father. I trusted him. The realization left a bitter taste in my mouth. Late that afternoon, Gordon Reeves called. I updated him on my progress. Then I asked the question that had been growing in my mind all day. Did my grandfather know exactly what was happening? There was silence. Then Gordon answered carefully. Yes. The certainty in his voice surprised me. How can you be sure? Because I helped document some of it. I sat upright. What do you mean? General Carter retained our firm several years ago. My heartbeat quickened. He was concerned about protecting portions of the estate. From who? Another pause. Then, your father. The word landed heavily. Not because I hadn't suspected it. Because hearing another person say it made it real. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Gordon continued. Your grandfather loved your father. I know. He never stopped loving him. That hurt more than if he hadn't. Because I understood exactly what he meant. Some people break your heart without ever losing your love. Parents, children, family. Love survives things respect cannot. What happened? I asked. Eventually, your grandfather concluded that money was making the situation worse. I looked toward the mountain ridge outside the window. The trees moved gently in the wind. He believed your father would continue sacrificing everything to protect Michael. I closed my eyes, because deep down I knew that was true. Then Gordon said something unexpected. Emily, there is another letter you haven't reached yet. I frowned. How do you know? Because your grandfather told me about it. My stomach tightened. What does it say? I don't know the contents. A brief pause. But I know where it is. He gave me directions. Specific shelf. Specific box. Specific envelope. When the call ended, I crossed the room immediately. The envelope was exactly where he described. Dated 8 months before my grandfather's death. The same period Gordon had mentioned regarding the updated will. I opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter. Longer than the others. More personal. I recognized the change immediately. This wasn't a record. It was a goodbye. Emily, if you're reading this, I am gone. And if I know your father, he's already disappointed you. Perhaps worse. Those words alone made my chest tighten. I continued. The letter described my grandfather's final decision. Why he changed the will. Why he chose me. Why he excluded my father. Then I reached a sentence that made tears fill my eyes. Not because of the money. Because of what it revealed. You are the only Carter who still understands honor. I stared at the page for a long time. Honor. The word carried different meaning inside military families. It wasn't about medals, or uniforms, or public recognition. It meant integrity when nobody was watching. Doing what was right when it cost something. Keeping promises, accepting responsibility. My grandfather believed I had done that. And somehow that mattered more than $35 million. For a few minutes I simply sat there, holding the letter. Missing him? Then my phone vibrated. A text message. Unknown number. I opened it. 3 words appeared. We need to talk. Below them was another message. It's Dad. My stomach immediately tightened. A third message arrived seconds later. I know about the inheritance. Outside clouds began gathering over the mountains. Dark. Heavy. Slow-moving. I stared at the screen. Then another message appeared. I'm coming to Asheville. Whether you like it or not. For several seconds I said nothing. Then I looked down at my grandfather's letter. At the words written in black ink. You are the only Carter who still understands honor. Something told me the next chapter of this story had finally arrived. And for the first time, my father wasn't coming to see his daughter. He was coming for the money. My father arrived in Asheville 2 days later. Not alone. Michael came with him. That fact told me everything I needed to know before either of them stepped out of the truck. Because if this visit were truly about repairing our relationship, Michael wouldn't have been there. He was there because this wasn't a family conversation. It was a negotiation. Or at least they thought it would be. I watched them pull into the driveway from the study window. The sky was overcast. Low clouds hung over the mountains. The kind of gray afternoon that makes the world feel suspended between seasons. Margaret happened to be in the kitchen when they arrived. She looked through the window, then looked at me. Do you want me to stay? I appreciated the question. Because she understood something important. Support isn't taking control. Support is simply standing nearby if needed. I smiled. No. She nodded, then quietly left through the back door. The knock came 30 seconds later. 3 sharp knocks. Confident. Entitled. My father had always knocked that way. As if every door already belonged to him. I opened it. For a moment nobody spoke. The last time we'd seen each other he had thrown me out of his house. Now he stood on my grandfather's porch. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Emily. His voice sounded softer than I remembered. Too soft. Carefully soft. The kind of voice people use when they want something. Dad. Michael offered an awkward nod. I returned it. No hugs followed. No apologies. No acknowledgement of what had happened. My father glanced toward my stomach. I was beginning to show slightly. Something flickered across his face. Not affection. Calculation. Then he smiled. I've been worried about you. The sentence was so absurd I almost laughed. Instead I stepped aside. Come in. They entered. My father immediately began looking around. Not obviously, but I noticed the bookshelves, the furniture, the photographs, the house, cataloging, assessing, evaluating, the way investors inspect property, not the way grieving family members revisit memories. We sat in the living room. For several moments silence lingered. Then my father cleared his throat. I made mistakes. There it was. The opening move. Simple. Controlled. Carefully rehearsed. I said nothing. He continued. When you told me about the baby, I reacted badly. Badly. Interesting choice of words, as though he had forgotten my coffee order. Not rejected his grandchild. I was emotional. Still, I said nothing. My father shifted in his chair. You know how much your mother meant to me. I almost admired the tactic. Almost. Because it was skillful. He wasn't discussing his actions. He was discussing his pain. Redirecting sympathy toward himself. A maneuver I'd seen him use for years. Unfortunately for him, I had spent the previous week reading my grandfather's journals. I recognized the pattern now. What do you want, Dad? The question landed harder than I intended. His eyes narrowed slightly, then relaxed. We're family. There it was. Another familiar phrase. Family. The word appeared every time money entered a conversation. Every single time. Michael finally spoke. You don't have to be hostile. I turned toward him. For the first time since they'd arrived. Hostile. His jaw tightened. Nobody is fighting. I looked at my father. Then back at him. You stood there while he disowned me. Silence. Michael looked away. Exactly as he had that day? My father intervened quickly. We're not here to discuss that. Of course not. Because discussing that would require accountability. We're here to discuss your grandfather. And there it was. The truth. Finally. Not me. Not the baby. Not reconciliation. The estate. I leaned back in my chair. My grandfather's chair. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. What about him? My father's posture changed. Subtle. But noticeable. The performance dropped slightly. $35 million is a tremendous responsibility. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. You've always had responsibilities, Emily. I waited. So perhaps this situation should be approached as a family. There it was. The proposal. Not stated directly. Not yet. But approaching. I looked at Michael. He was watching me carefully. The same way gamblers watch cards being dealt. Then my father finally said it. The money should benefit everyone. I nodded slowly. There it is. At last. The actual reason for the visit. Not concern. Not regret. Money. 35 million reasons. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. My father talked about unity, legacy, family obligations, shared responsibility. Every argument sounded reasonable in isolation. Together they formed something else entirely. Entitlement. The assumption that my grandfather's decision required correction. Eventually they left. But not before my father delivered one final sentence. You should think carefully before making permanent decisions. A warning disguised as advice. After they drove away, I returned to the study. For a long time, I simply sat there, thinking. Then my phone rang. Gordon Reeves. His timing was remarkable. Emily. Hi, Gordon. His voice sounded unusually serious. Immediately, my stomach tightened. What happened? There has been a legal filing. The room suddenly felt smaller. What kind of filing? A challenge. I closed my eyes. Of course. My father wasn't asking for money. He was preparing to take it. He filed already. This morning. I laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because it confirmed everything. The visit. The apology. The concern. The family speech. All theater. The legal attack had already begun before he arrived. What are they claiming? Gordon sighed. Several pages rustled in the background. They argue that your grandfather was influenced during the final revision of the estate plan. I sat upright. What? They claim the distribution is unreasonable. My grandfather had spent 40 years commanding soldiers, managing multi-million-dollar operations, making life-and-death decisions. Yet somehow they wanted a court to believe he didn't understand his own will. The argument was insulting, but it was also dangerous. Can they win? No. The certainty in Gordon's voice helped. But that doesn't mean they won't try. I stared toward the mountain ridge outside. Storm clouds gathered beyond the trees, dark and heavy. What happens now? Another pause. Then Gordon answered. There is something else. My heartbeat quickened. What? One of the final documents your grandfather left has been reviewed. I frowned. What document? A recording. The word immediately caught my attention. A recording? Yes, my grandfather had apparently recorded a private conversation several years earlier. A conversation involving my father. The contents had remained sealed until now, protected under specific instructions. My pulse quickened. What does it say? I haven't listened to it personally. Another pause. But I know who is speaking. my father, and my grandfather. I felt a chill run through me, because suddenly I understood. My grandfather hadn't merely left evidence. He had anticipated this exact moment. The challenge, the lawsuit, the greed, the denial, all of it, as though he had been watching events unfold years before they happened. When can I hear it? Soon. The storm finally broke outside. Rain struck the windows. Wind moved through the trees. And for the first time since arriving in Asheville, I felt absolutely certain about something. My father wasn't fighting for justice. He wasn't protecting family. He wasn't honoring my grandfather's memory. He was trying to take what had never belonged to him. And somewhere inside the documents my grandfather left behind was the proof. 2 weeks later, Gordon called again. This time his voice carried no uncertainty, only facts. The hearing date had been scheduled. My father's challenge was officially moving forward. And now there would be a judge, a courtroom, and a recording that neither side could ignore. The battle my grandfather predicted had finally begun. The hearing took place on a Tuesday morning in Charlotte. By then I was nearly 5 months pregnant, far enough along that strangers smiled when they noticed, far enough along that I could sometimes feel small movements late at night when the world became quiet. Those moments had changed me, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily. The way sunrise changes a landscape, slowly, then completely. I arrived at the courthouse with Gordon Reeves and 2 members of his legal team. The building itself wasn't impressive. Gray stone, tall windows, security checkpoints, the kind of place where life-changing decisions happen in rooms that look surprisingly ordinary. My father was already there. So was Michael. Neither approached me. Neither offered a greeting. For reasons I couldn't entirely explain, that hurt less than it once would have. Because somewhere during the previous 2 months, I had stopped hoping they would become different people. Acceptance isn't forgiveness. Acceptance is simply seeing reality clearly. And reality was standing 20 feet away wearing a navy suit and pretending not to look at me. The hearing began shortly after 9. The judge was a woman in her 60s, sharp-eyed, calm, efficient. The type of person who had probably heard every family argument imaginable. My father's attorney spoke first. He argued that the estate distribution was unreasonable, that General Carter's final decisions were inconsistent with prior plans, that family expectations had been disrupted. I listened quietly. The words sounded polished, professional, persuasive even. If someone knew nothing about my family, they might have believed them. Then Gordon stood, and everything changed. Facts have a peculiar power. They don't shout. They don't perform. They simply exist. One document after another entered the record. Financial statements, property records, correspondence, trust revisions, my grandfather's journals, years of evidence, years of observations, years of concern. The picture became impossible to ignore. My grandfather hadn't acted impulsively. He had acted carefully, methodically, deliberately. Then came the recording. The courtroom became noticeably quieter when Gordon introduced it. Even my father seemed uncomfortable. The audio wasn't perfect. The conversation had occurred years earlier, but every word was understandable. My grandfather's voice filled the room first. Older, slower, yet unmistakably firm. Then my father's voice appeared, and with it came the moment that changed everything. Michael needs the money. My father sounded frustrated, tired, defensive. My grandfather responded, Michael needs accountability. Several seconds passed. Then my father said the sentence that seemed to drain all the air from the room. Emily can take care of herself. I felt something twist inside my chest. Not because I had never heard the sentiment before, because this time it was undeniable. Recorded. Permanent. Real. The recording continued. My grandfather's voice remained calm, measured, disappointed. One day you'll lose the only child who truly loves you. Silence followed. Long enough to become uncomfortable. Long enough to become truth. The recording ended. Nobody spoke immediately. Even the judge sat quietly for a moment. The kind of silence that appears when everyone in a room understands something important at exactly the same time. My father stared at the table. For the first time all morning he looked old. Not physically, emotionally. Like a man suddenly confronted by every decision he spent years avoiding. The remainder of the hearing moved quickly. The legal arguments that once seemed strong began collapsing under the weight of evidence. By mid-afternoon, the judge delivered her ruling. The challenge was denied. Completely. The estate remained exactly as my grandfather intended. $35 million. Every cent. Legally mine. The decision should have felt overwhelming. victorious, life-changing. Instead, I felt strangely calm, because somewhere along the way the money had stopped being the point. The truth had become the point, and the truth was now public, official, permanent. The hearing ended. People began gathering documents. Chairs moved. Conversations resumed. Then Gordon handed me one final envelope. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My grandfather. My throat tightened. What is this? The last letter. I stared at it. This was supposed to be opened after the hearing. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it. The courtroom faded. The conversations disappeared. For a moment it felt like it was just me and him again. Emily, if you are reading this, then you finished what I asked of you. More importantly, you finished it honestly. Money can be inherited. Character cannot. I paused, already fighting tears. The letter continued. Your father inherited my name. You inherited my trust. Never confuse the two. I read the sentence twice, then a third time, because somehow those words explained everything. The inheritance, the condition, the journals, the letters, the recordings. My grandfather hadn't been protecting money. He had been protecting values. The values he believed would survive after he was gone. When I finally looked up, I realized my vision had blurred. For a moment, I simply sat there, holding the letter, missing him, loving him, thanking him. A few minutes later, I walked outside. The afternoon sun had finally broken through the clouds. My father stood alone near the courthouse steps. Michael was gone. The attorneys were gone. Just the two of us remained. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then he looked at me. Not angry. Not hostile. Just tired. Emily? His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I waited. He swallowed. I made mistakes. The sentence came years too late. But it came. I nodded. Yes. His eyes dropped briefly. Then returned to mine. I want another chance. There it was. The thing he should have asked for long before the lawsuit. Long before the inheritance. Long before the rejection. I looked at him carefully. The man who had raised me. The man who had failed me. The man who was both things at the same time. Then I thought about my daughter. About the future. About the family I intended to build. And finally I answered. You rejected her before she was even born. Tears appeared in his eyes. I continued. My grandfather never did. For a moment neither of us moved. Then I turned and walked away. Not because I hated him. Because some journeys only move forward. 1 year later, my daughter entered the world on a warm July morning. 7 pounds, bright eyes, strong lungs. Perfect. I named her Charlotte. Not after a family member. Not after a tradition. Simply because Ethan once told me he loved the name. The inheritance changed our lives. Of course it did. Pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But the greatest gift my grandfather left wasn't financial. It was clarity. The ability to see people as they truly are. And to understand my own worth regardless of their opinions. Today, Charlotte is sleeping in the room down the hall as I tell you this story. Sometimes I watch her and think about everything that had to happen for us to arrive here. A mountain house, a box of letters, a courtroom, a grandfather who believed in me, and a father who taught me one final lesson without ever intending to. The people who underestimate your value are often the people most afraid of discovering it. If this story touched you, I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my position? Have you ever had to choose between protecting your peace and holding on to a relationship? Leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Stories connect us in ways we rarely expect. And if you enjoy heartfelt family dramas like this one, subscribe and join us for more journeys every week. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who truly deserve your love.